Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 9. Oh my God, of season 3 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole M. Young Maarten, and I serve as a producer and host for this series. I hope that you all have had a chance to really relax and start settling into 2023. I hope where you are right now, the weather is decent here in Northern Connecticut. It's a little cloudy, but it's warm enough to actually like breathe. So I hope that where you are now is nice and comfortable for what you need. Let's go ahead and get started because I'm extremely excited for today's author. Like just, oh my God, so pumped. Sorry, I'm gonna fangirl a lot today. I'm gonna apologize right now. I'm gonna fangirl a whole lot, and you'll see why in a minute. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind the scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted close to 50 authors representing various genres, including children's books, young adult fiction, poetry, urban creative nonfiction, memoir, history, horror, essays, food, and culture from around the globe, including Western Massachusetts, Maryland, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Florida, upstate New York's Hudson Valley, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Chicago, Virginia, Portugal, and Costa Rica. Today, I add St. Martin, yes, the Caribbean, onto this list. Today, we welcome Lisa Pegram, who will be talking about her expansive body of work and get a sneak peek into her forthcoming memoir. Many of you may have heard her name multiple times already on Black Writers Read. Why? Because she's been one of the reasons why I've been able to book such an amazing breadth of guests on the series. And so now it's just an amazing honor and blessing to be able to have her on now to talk about her own work. Lisa Pegram is a writer, arts integration specialist, and publishing professional who hails from Washington, D.C. She has over 20 years of experience in high level program design with such organizations as the Smithsonian Institute, the Corcoran Gallery of Art, and National Geographic. She served as DC Writers Corps program director for a decade and as co chair of United Nations affiliate international women's conferences in the US, India, and Bali. Her endeavors as a literary publicist and acquisitions editor are sparked by a desire to advocate for and amplify underrepresented voices. This is why Lisa and I partner together a lot. Lisa completed her MFA in 2012 and has an executive certification in arts and culture strategies from UPenn. She is currently working on a family memoir that is a narrative cookbook which explores her life story through the lens of food and music, exploring the Black diaspora as a way of life. She's currently based on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. To learn more about Lisa and updates of her work, please follow her on Instagram at LADYPQ. I'm sorry, PCOQ. Toggling squeaks here. Today's conversation is presented in collaboration with Levee Break Lit. So, as you heard at the very beginning, I've been looking forward to chatting with Lisa specifically about her work for a very long time. We first met when we were paired as panel moderators for the 2021 Tell It Slant Festival, which is hosted by the Emily Dickinson Museum. I was introduced to Lisa by Michael Mercurio of Faraday Publishing. He mentioned how our work aligned and how Lisa and I would make perfect partners in the literary world. To prep for Tell It Slant and us working together, I did some research on Lisa, including purchasing her chapbook, which I hope you can see it here, Cracked Calabash. She's also featured in Where We Stand, another book that I have on my bookshelf of hers. Her work is extremely dope. Please make sure to purchase her books, look her up, read her essays, follow her on Instagram. Lisa spends a majority of her time championing others as an acquisitions editor and literary publicist. She makes it a point to set the table for creatives and authors of the global majority and gifting gardens of flowers to underrepresented writers. I absolutely love that we have an opportunity to gift her the same pedestal, praise, and flowers as well today. Her literary voice is beyond phenomenal and needs to be shared, taught, archived, and lauded. So thanks to everyone for joining us today to recognize Lisa's talents and gifts. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. First, Lisa will read excerpts from her work. Then we'll chat about her work. Afterwards, if any questions come through from the Q&A, we'll engage in conversation, possibly mixing some Q&A questions together from our viewers, which, if you are joining us from Facebook and YouTube, please feel free to drop any question that you have for Lisa in the comments section today. And FYI, if your question does make it on air, it will also make it onto the audio podcast, which will be posting next week onto those platforms as well. I will compile the questions, and based on where we are in our conversation, I may pose them to Lisa at that moment or wait until after our conversation in the formal Q&A. Like I said, I'm extremely excited today. I may be tripping up my words a lot. So let's go ahead and bring Lisa onto the virtual stage. Hi.
Hey, Nicole. Hey, everybody. Happy Saturday.
And I hope it's okay to mention that it is a birthday too.
It isn't, but it's the countdown. My birthday is on Thursday.
Yes, so we can count down. Yay!
6th. Yes.
Yes.
So it's coming. It's coming around the mountain when she comes.
Yeah.
Riding 6 white horses, and we'll all have chicken and dumplings.
Yes. Just coming around that mountain. Speaking of coming around that mountain, I'm going to go ahead and turn it around to you. So have fun reading.
Okay. All right. Well, I am going to read a bit from the piece that I am working on right now, which is a food memoir based on my life and my family. And so this section is called Dessert Every Day. My grandfather was a trip. An English professor, his daily class motto was, "Don't let the sun set on your ignorance." Over the years, we debated Shakespeare, Hughes, Cullen, and his favorite, Robert Frost. I owe my love of the written word in great part to him. As significant as that may be, my fondest memories of him have little to do with poetry or prose. They're from when I was about 4, when, after my parents split, I lived with my grandparents for a few months while my mom was moving us from Boston to DC. Their chic home at the end of a long, winding road had always been my favorite place, so it was an ideal transition, though I missed my mother terribly. I was soothed by wide stretches of time to enjoy the rambling house. Here's what I did: read, tinker on the piano, create tableau with Yadro figurines, read, look for shapes like clouds in the abstract art on the walls, mimic the faces of the African masks they collected, read, play dress up in grandma's closet, count the tiny oranges on the citrus tree in the living room window, read, pop over to the Mads next door, run around the grassy yard and the forest just beyond the patio, but not too deep, and of course, read. Most of all, I loved setting the table for every meal. My grandmother didn't have a china cabinet. She had a walk-in china closet. It was lined with shelves stacked with crystal, china, and silver, the way her dressing room upstairs was full of clothes, handbags, and shoes. There were plain bisque plates and saucers rimmed in gold. There were other plates meant only for a certain dish, like one for seafood imprinted with a queen angelfish. There was a whole set of bowls and platters shaped like vegetables, and cut crystal tumblers and goblets that cast rainbows across the room when you turned the light on. It was a wonderland. Who needed Legos when I could create a whole landscape across a table? I relished every detail of the ritual. At the table, always 2 glasses for Grandpa, one for iced tea and one for water. Sometimes the iced tea was swapped for iced coffee at lunch. He was the first person I had ever seen drink that particular beverage. This was way before Starbucks that he had me pour the leftover coffee from breakfast over ice, splash it with milk, and stir in one sweet and low with what Grandma taught me was an iced teaspoon. I marveled at the long scrolled silver handle, wondering who in the world thought to make a specific spoon to stir one type of drink with. At dinner, I would pick amber glass ice cream cups or shallow bowls with petite spoons for dessert, which my grandfather insisted be served every day, no exceptions. Grandpa had reached the age where Grandma was trimming the fat on his diet. She was hawking his salt and sugar intake, as a wife does, according to doctor's orders. She did all the cooking, which gave her control over most of what he ate. He grudgingly obliged, but was adamant about that dessert every day, come what may. One afternoon, she had an unexpected meeting after work at the university. This left him to pick me up from the daycare on campus and make us dinner. We were off to a comical start when he pulled up to the playground in his mustard brown Ford Pinto. I hated that car. Everyone in our family hated that car except Grandpa. Dolly, their longtime housekeeper, rolled her eyes at us as she trailed him out of the front door whenever he gave her a ride home in it. It was a weird, rounded shape. The seats were uncomfortable and it had no air conditioning to combat the Virginia summer heat. My grandmother always drove Volvos, trading up with each new model. She had a lead foot, and I looked forward to zooming home in her shiny car every day. When my grandfather showed up in that farting brown bean, I was not pleased and refused to get in. "Where's Grandma?" I asked, with a period, not a question mark at the end. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Get your little behind in this car," with a period, not a question mark at the end. He gunned the engine and away we crawled. Trying to break the ice, I asked if he might like to take me to Kmart to get a Barbie I had my eye on. She has on workout gear and even comes with her own set of weights. Affordable and a very healthy example, I reasoned. My grandparents had been comrades of Kenneth and Mamie Clark, and one day, over after-dinner fraps at Friendly's, told me about the doll test because, yes, that's the level of conversation they had with me at the age of 4. I wove this into my pitch, thinking it would drive things home. The black Barbies are on sale too, and you know that's not always true. The black one is my first choice, I offered, as if a reward were in order. My grandfather raised his brow at my cheek, but was not discernibly impressed. He ignored my request and replied, "Your grandmother put me in charge of dinner, so we're eating out." He set his jaw like he was on a serious mission, turning down a bumpy road. The 8-track in the Pinto was busted, so we rode in silence. I was used to eating out with grown-ups, and as a child foodie, was excited to see what new spot he seemed so determined to get to. I did wish I could change out of my play clothes into something more appropriate, but I knew I was on thin ice after the tantrum about the car, so I just refreshed my cherry chapstick and kept my mouth shut. We pulled up to a rusty takeout barbecue truck. He ordered, "Give me a large slab of ribs with extra sauce, potato salad, collard greens with neck bones, and mac and cheese." When the buxom lady, the color of candied yams behind the counter, returned to bag it all up, she grabbed 4 soft slices of white bread to tuck on top with a side of coleslaw. The smell of savory grease in the car made my mouth water. But even at my tender age, I suspected this menu was not in line with the diet Grandma had established for him. When I asked as much, he turned to me with pleading eyes. "Don't tell your grandmother what we ate. Let's cooperate. You just learned that word on Sesame Street. Let's cooperate to enjoy this together. It'll be our little secret." I needed to think. I couldn't wait to dig in, but this was a tattletale's dream. The gospel choir of brown sugar, hot peppers, and vinegar in my nose almost had me sold when a tiny light bulb went off in my head. I smiled. He smiled back. I sat up to my full posture and said, "Grandpa, I would be happy to keep this between us if we could just swing by Kmart on the way home." He taught me another new word that day, touche. Only coasters and placemats were set on the table, more for hiding evidence than keeping tradition. We proceeded to commit what was tantamount to sacrilege in my grandmother's dining room and ate right out of the styrofoam with plastic utensils, smacking our lips and building a gruesome tower of bones. My grandparents were devout Catholics, and I wondered if this moment would make it with Grandpa into the confessional. After we had washed our red, sticky hands, he took the vanilla ice cream out of the freezer to soften while I freed my new Barbie from her box. Then he reached in the spattered bag to pull out a final container. What could possibly be left? He told me to close my eyes, lifted the lid, and waved it under my nose. Cinnamon, nutmeg, butter. It was summer in the South, of course. Warm peach cobbler. Everything I ate that night had a faint aftertaste of my cherry lip balm. Our full bellies introduced a bit more sanity into the situation. Wait, Grandpa, I held my tiny index finger in the air. We're going too far. Close that cobbler. The sternness in my voice parroted his earlier tone when he told me to get my little behind in the car. Listen, Missy, he began to protest, eyeing the clock. Grandma would be back soon, but by my count, there was still time to get ourselves together. Trust me, I chirped. He sat and watched as I methodically cleared the table of the carnage and walked into the kitchen. Then I washed my hands again, made my way around to the overhead china cabinet on the opposite side of the island, because yes, she had more than one, and climbed up on the bar stool to pull out 2 silver dessert cups. As I returned to the table, I announced, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. I carefully filled each cup with a heaping spoon of cobbler, which Grandpa topped with ice cream. He sat back as I scrambled into his lap. Both of my grandparents loved it when I did that. And before we both plunged in, he said, I'm glad we did this, Lisa Mae. You all right with me, girl? It was a rare, simply tender moment between the two of us who adored each other, but enjoyed a healthy dose of sarcasm in our usual exchanges. I patted his hand, looked deep into his eyes, and replied, you better close up that trash and take it all the way outside before she gets home. I never dimed on him about our forbidden meal until many years later, after he had died. I shared it after dinner, the evening my eldest cousin inherited Grandpa's seat at the head of the table. Everyone laughed at the story, but no one louder or harder than my grandmother. She dabbed tears from her eyes with a linen napkin as she shook her head and told me to bring out the silver cups and some spoons, because dessert every day. Thank you.
Oh my God, this is like so good on so many levels, and just like so relatable too. The cherry chapstick, the throw out the trash immediately. So
Not in
grandma
don't throw it in the house. You got to take it outside.
outside.
Outside, the outside bins where only the trash man gonna see it. Because she gonna get you.
Yes. And I love that, like, just the way in which you describe things is such a way to where so many different people can connect to it. Because me, I'm from the very specific African American experience. I connected to it, but I can imagine others, not only from the African diaspora, but from other parts of like the world, can connect to it because of just the way in which, again, like, you set the table for so many people. You're setting the table for people to come and like to come into your work. Like, just
Thank you. Well, and I wanted to share that today because that's kind of the origin story of me setting the table, right? So I thought, instead of reading something about me as an adult, why not introduce you to little Lisa, so that you can see that I have actually been the same person since day one.
And I was like cheering when you were able to like finally get the Barbie down from Kmart. You
Barbie, man.
So yeah, so speaking of this particular breadth of writing, can you offer, I know like we talked about just like a sneak peek, but can you offer us a sneak peek into what we can look forward to purchase the memoir when it hits the shelves?
Sure. So the book itself is, I started out just writing, the story of my life, but then, when you're trying to recall, when you're trying to pull all of these memories back up, you've got to find a way to kind of open that Pandora's box, and the senses are a great way to do it. I consider myself to be a sensualist also. So I knew if I started tapping into like, what I tasted and what I heard, that would start to pull the memories out. And what I started to notice is as I started to look back on my life, the thing that um, was most effective for me was to recall food and music. Those were the two things, food and music. And as you can tell, that's still where I am to this day, right? So throughout my life, food and music have been a major part, a major framing actually for every memory that I have. Part of the food part of it is because, in large part, due to my grandparents, because we had this huge food tradition at home where my grandmother was just the hostess of the mostest. And it was a really powerful thing to watch because that was not only the space for us to create a lot of family memories, but my grandparents were also really big activists during the civil rights movement. My grandfather was the president of the NAACP in their town.
Wow.
And he was also, and they both were deans at an HBCU at Virginia State University. So, and my grandfather was, in addition to that, was also the special assistant to the president at the university. And because it was Jim Crow, and of course, Black people couldn't go to restaurants and you couldn't stay at hotels, all of the kind of notable people who came through town often either had a meal at my grandparents' house if they didn't stay over, right? Because they couldn't stay in the hotels. So there's this notion of setting the table being also, the ground that's laid and tilled for other things to happen. So you have a situation where you have Martin Luther King came to my grandparents' house, and Maya Angelou and Duke Ellington. All of these people had meals at my grandparents' house. My grandfather waged a whole boycott against the retail stores in town over dinner at that table. So I grew up with this notion that a table is a place for a family to come together, and a table is a place for a community to come together. So I knew that to tell my story, it would need to be through the lens of food. And the other piece, the other side of that was then music. In my house, my mother played music 24/7. I'm not exaggerating. The music was on in our house when we left the house. I mean, when we were not at home, the music was on. She would leave the radio on. I grew up in DC, so she would leave, most of the time it would be WHUR on, right? And so I would leave the house and we'd be listening to old classic R&B. You leave the house on Patti LaBelle and you come in the house and Luther Vandross is playing. You know what I'm saying? So there was never a time in my life where music wasn't playing. So there is this subconscious soundtrack that runs through my mind. So I knew if I wanted to tell the story of my life, all I needed to do was to tap into the food and tap into the soundtrack. And that's what will pull all the memories out. So every story in this book is a memory from a different part of my life or a different part of my family member's life. And it's all centered around food and music. And then every story is followed by a recipe. So it's this opportunity for the reader to participate, right, in this moment, to have this sensual experience where you could read this story. And then, so for example, after this story in the book is the recipe for a cherry and peach cobbler, right? So it was a peach cobbler, but I had my cherry chapstick, so I had to, it's my favorite too. So I put my own recipe for a cherry and peach cobbler. And actually, this particular piece that I read today was featured in the Reclamation exhibit at the National Museum of the Women in the Arts that Milani Douglas put together. So if you, I don't know if you have the link, but if you put that link, if you go to that link, you can get the recipe. So you can already try that recipe. So yeah, that's what this book is. It is what's called a narrative cookbook. And it is literally, me juxtaposing my life with my elders and the people who came before me all through the lens of food and music.
Nice. So why a memoir? You talked a little bit about this, but I would like to expand a little bit more. Why memoir at this point in your career, in your life, especially given that we know you in terms of poetry and nonfiction? What prepared you to integrate this genre into your category of offerings and the way you craft the worlds for your stories?
That's a great question. Well, I started out, I've always known that I wanted to write a book about my relationship with my grandmother because she and I are very much kindred spirits. And so I knew that was always going to happen one day. When I was in grad school, I wrote a lot of poems. In fact, my thesis was very much circled around me starting to grapple with these memories and think about these things. And I was writing poems about my family. And one thing I have come to find is that a lot of times the story, if you listen closely, the story will tell you what kind of vessel it wants to be poured into. And so I ended up with this great collection of poems that were inspired by my, by this experience. But I realized that it wanted to be prose. It didn't want to be poetry. So I was going to have to catch up, right? Because the story needed to be told through prose for a number of different reasons. And so this kind of coincided, but then also shortly after I moved to Curacao. So that was when I left the States and moved to the Caribbean. And I ended up actually there for a period of time having a personal chef business because I didn't have a job. I was trying to figure out something to do. And I always cook for people. And so when I first got there and I was meeting people and making friends, a lot of my friends were property managers for vacation rentals. And so one day we were all at a dinner I had made. And I said, if you guys ever have somebody that would want somebody to come cook, I would love to try to do like a personal chef thing. So that was a Saturday. And then I got an email on Sunday, can you cook on Tuesday? And then I was booked for like 5 years.
Wow.
So it was very cool though, because everything I had done before had been like teaching and writing. And so it engaged a different part of my brain. Cooking is also very physical. It allowed me to be creative, but in a different kind of way. So cut to, I had a chef gig one time during Thanksgiving because I'm living in a country that doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving. And it was too good of an opportunity to turn down, but I was in my feelings because I was cooking on Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving always reminds me of my grandmother because her birthday always falls right after Thanksgiving. So the day after Thanksgiving, we have like a champagne and birthday cake party for my grandmother. So I was kind of homesick that day while I was cooking for those other people. And they were really nice people. And so we had lots of chats with them. And after, we had cooked for, I cooked for them. We were sitting down having a glass of wine, and they were like, "Oh, you seem like you're a little low, maybe you're your usual self, but you seem like you have something on your mind." I said, "Yeah, well, I'm missing my grandmother a little bit. I should be drinking champagne and eating cake." And they're like, "Well, we just love your work so much. You've got to write a cookbook. You've got to write a cookbook." And everybody's been telling me I've got to write a cookbook. So I thought the next book I was going to write was going to be a cookbook. And then I said, "Yeah, but I always said that the first prose book I was going to write was going to be about my grandmother." And then someone at the table said, "Well, why don't you just put them together?" And I thought, "Oh, wow. Okay. So this is going to be 2 in 1, right? So now it's giving like water for chocolate, right?" So I'm like, okay, so how can I take all of these poems that I have that are based on my family and all of this experience that I've had now engaging in this regular practice of setting tables on a higher level, even though I've always been the dinner party person to have people over for food people. So how do I take all of these experiences together and use them to push myself into this new genre? And that was a lot of fuel, So when I sat down to start writing, I started recalling the memories and started asking myself, like, what was the food and what was the music playing? And then it just started flowing. And I read a lot. I love memoirs. And I've always been one that I came into poetry from reading poetry, right? Ntozake Shange I can definitely credit for being my first inspiration. That's another poet also that writes a lot about food. Then did a foray into prose and also wrote a narrative cookbook. If God can cook, so can I, right? So I thought, okay, well, this is my time to sort of, try this out. And I had read a bunch of memoirs. Some of my favorite memoirs, the Billie Holiday memoir for sure, Lady Sings the Blues, the Quincy Jones memoir I loved. So I just started kind of pulling. I have sort of an eye to be able to, because I've been a teacher, to be able to pull craft out of things as I'm reading them. So I just started to go back to the memoirs that I really loved and read it from that lens, and sort of took notes, did a little research, talked to some people, and then I was on my way.
Nice. And it brings me back to, excuse me, and it now, because I was always wondering, because I've been following you on Instagram for some time, and you're always posting these beautifully colorful dishes that you make. And I'm like, I've always wanted to ask her, does she know how to cook professionally? Because I love like your combination of ingredients. So hearing about this part of your life, it now makes a lot of sense.
Yes, indeed. And it was all very spontaneous. It wasn't something that I planned. Food was something that just brought me joy. I certainly didn't think about it in terms of work, although I did also follow my grandparents' example of the table being the best place to get things done, to blaze trails, to bring things together. So people together. So everything I've ever done, when I was teaching for Writers Corps, I would have at the end of the year, I would have a potluck at my house where all the writers would come. When I taught young people, the two things I always wanted to make sure in the programs that I was teaching is that the kids got paid and that they were fed. So there's always been this notion of, people think about the classroom. For me, it's always the dinner table. And so this was just a natural progression that happened. And I find in life that when opportunities are presented to you, if you just listen closely, you'll realize that sometimes straying off of what you think is your prescribed path can actually introduce you to things that even enhance what that path is.
Yeah, and I needed that now because I'm in this weird, just a quick aside, I'm in this weird, what am I doing with my life? I'm
Hmm.
finishing my doctorate, and I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? And hearing that it's okay to allow space, to allow the universe to lead you, I'm like, okay.
Absolutely. Sometimes you just have to listen because, especially when you're a goal-oriented person like you're super ambitious, goal-oriented, effective, productive person. You feel like I should be doing something. Like I got to
Yes.
figure out what I'm going to do. And so when I made the first move out of the country, I thought I received the idea that maybe I just needed to listen. Because what I would have done had I just gone there with what I had was I would
Mhm.
have duplicated the same life that I had in DC. And that's what I wasn't there to do that, right? This was the opening of a new chapter. And so I would have gotten another teaching job, and I would have been doing the same thing that I was doing before. Whereas allowing this little bit of space in for me to just be still and be quiet and listen. So I definitely invite you to do that. Like if you have the space to give yourself a minute, just give yourself a beat, and often it will come to you. And even if something seems to come out of left field, it's not always left field, because your greater life's work is multidimensional and it has texture, and all of the experiences that you have are going to contribute to like what that bigger picture is. So you may think you're straying, but in actuality you're about to have an experience that's going to give you another skill set. I had no idea when I said that day, if you ever have somebody that wants to come cook, that I would end up writing a whole book about my life through the lens of food. But because I was willing to go down that road, then I was able to receive a whole new level of marching orders. I'm very happy to be here.
So on that note, the next question I have for you is about, excuse me, the evolution of your voice. This is a great
Mhm.
transition. Your literary canon, and yes, Lisa has a canon. She has a lot of work out there. Includes poetry and nonfiction. How has your literary voice evolved over time, especially since writing your chapbook, Crack Calabash, which was published in 2015 by Central Square Press? What has become the mission of your words and of your work?
Hmm. Okay, so how has my voice changed? Well, I've definitely been writing more prose since Cracked Calabash. Um, and I think even Cracked Calabash is also an opening to this, right? Because there's this notion, Cracked Calabash carries this notion of the calabash being so many things in African based and indigenous cultures, that the calabash can be used to serve water, it can be used to serve food, it can be used to serve medicine, right? So it's it's already an opening table setting, right? It's the beginning. And there are a lot of those poems that then sparked the essays and the chapters in this book that were in that book, right? That was the beginning of it. So I would say that Cracked Calabash was sort of this seed that then opened me up to venture into the prose. And now I am writing more prose because writing a memoir is ambitious. It's a lot. And given what I'm doing and the fact that I'm pulling in other generations, there's a lot of research involved. And I was telling you before, of course, for my first prose project, I couldn't just take something that was just a little easy to enter, right? I had to, do Like Water for Chocolate, Roots, Beyonce's Homecoming, and Insecure all in one place for recipes. You know what I mean? Like, I always have to do the most. I don't do it on purpose, but I've got to be a little, bit extra. So because I've shifted, I'm really writing more prose because I can't have one foot in one place and one in the other right now as I'm in that space. And then my voice, I noticed in my prose that there is space for my humor to come out in a way that it doesn't in my poetry. And I'm really enjoying that, right? I like cracking jokes in my writing, which I don't know why I don't feel moved to crack jokes in my poetry in the same kind of way. I think it's the abstraction of poetry. Sometimes things just want to be said. So I'm really enjoying playing, with my sense of humor. And then as far as my mission, you asked, the other thing too that's changed about my voice is I'm more and more just not trying to code switch. I'm not feeling code switching. I'm in a mode now where I'm not trying to do that. I just feel like it's a waste of time. And I feel like it reminds me of what Toni Morrison said, and I won't say it as eloquently as she did, but she says when you do that, then you subconsciously indicate who you're talking to.
Oh, wow. Good point.
Right. And, for example, white writers don't have to do that. If I'm reading a book by an Irish writer, they're just going to say what they say. And then I just have to figure it out. I have to be on board enough for what I'm reading, and it's on me to figure it out. And so I'm really pushing up against that, and I'm just not doing that. And so I want to, and particularly if I'm going to talk about my life, I want to be conversational. I want to speak the way I speak. And sometimes, my grandfather was the dean of the English department. I can speak the Queen's English. And sometimes that's the place for me to do it. But sometimes, it can go, like I said, from the English classroom to, can you give me them neck bones and then collard greens and then macaroni and cheese? You know what I mean? And I am not going to say that with like my napkin in my lap, right? I want to be authentic. So that's been a big thing in my writing, right? Like shedding this notion of this external gaze. I have, as a writer, and then that has that deeper impact of like showing up authentically exactly as I am. So that's been a huge part of the shift in my voice. And then my mission is tied in to there too, which is just for my own writing and for all of the people that, I'm lucky enough to help along their way, is to advocate for and amplify the voices of underrepresented people in publishing. These stories that we're not hearing, right? The stories, the perspectives that we're getting, there's so much that is untapped. And so whether it's the way I show up in my own writing, like as you said, I love to hear you say, there are so many different people who could relate to and identify with what you just shared, right? That's the idea, right? We're not all one dimensional. And so in my own work, I'm going to push myself to not only sharing my personal experience, but how does that tap into the universal? And then also for the people that I work with, I'm looking to work with people who are sharing stories and who are sharing work that shines a light onto the experience of Black folks and people of color, while also then elevating that experience to something universal.
Nice. And you make me think about, because I have been, one reason why I've been kind of like on this writer block is because of my dissertation, which is a whole other like writing project. But it's like that authentic voice and like, how do you want it to show up? And this leads into my next question. And sometimes I feel like because for people who don't know, I'm poetry and playwriting, and it's like there are these guideposts and rules that genres, because of the Queen's English, kind of set up for you. And sometimes it's like, when I know for me, when I try to tell a story using a particular genre, like doors just slam in my face, because I'm just like, I'm trying to tell my authentic voice is like, I'm a pop gum no matter what space I'm in. It doesn't matter. I don't care. But it's like genre can limit you a little bit, because sometimes genre dictates who then gets access to your work. And so now this leads me to my next question. As someone who is multi-genre, what do you think are some possibilities and limitations of each of the genres that you're working with, poetry and nonfiction? And then how have these guideposts informed your approach to writing your latest project?
Well, first of all, I decided if I'm going to write about my life, then I want to write about my life the way I want to write about my life. I'm not going to be sitting over here trying to figure out how you want to hear me talk about my life. That's preposterous, you know? And I think that's other part of what you were saying about genre, right? It's that we have these notions of form where we're so busy trying to prove that we can accomplish the form that sometimes what you're trying to share is compromise, because I'm proving to you that I can do this, right? Whereas when you reach a level of mastery and a level of understanding, yes, first you do have to understand the form. You have to understand it to then deconstruct it, but then by all means deconstruct it, right? So, you know, I like to say, especially when it comes to code switching, if you can have a conversation with me for 5 minutes and not know that I'm an intelligent person, then, and that my writing, where I speak to you authentically in whatever colloquialisms and whatever slang and whatever I want to use to help give you the true flavor of the way I speak and the way I tell story. If you need me to try to fit myself in that box to legitimize me, then that's your problem, not mine, right? So I had to get to the place where I'm like really rooted and grounded in that. And like, and if you need that, then you need to figure, I don't know, you need some kind of literary Google Translate or something. I don't know. But it's not going to be on me to do that for you, right? Because you want me to show up as my most authentic self, because that's going to give you the real story, right? Right. So I think that's a huge limitation often for writers of color too. It's like, well, what can I do to figure out a way to be able to do what I want to do, but frame it in a way that the mainstream will consider it acceptable or interesting to allow me the platform to be able to tell this story. And yet we know that the stories who have ultimately broken through and given the most impact are the ones that don't do that. Again, you know, my patron saint, Toni Morrison, is like, I'm not writing my books for white people. I'm writing my books for readers. Okay. So you pick up the book and you read it. I'm going to speak the way I speak. I'm going to speak to my people, and you're welcome to pick it up and read it. But we're not going to do this whole, you know what it reminds me of? It's like the literary version of, did you ever see that movie, The Birdcage?
Yes! Fussy.
You got Nathan Lane, you know what I mean? Trying to be like all of what he is not to impress these people. You know, we're not doing that. And so I think we have come to a point as writers, or at least I have certainly in my development, where I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to take the risk to be authentic so that I can be proud about what I'm putting in the world. And I'm willing to use the position that I have as a publishing professional to advocate for other people to do the same thing, to defend people's right to do the same thing, to not have to acrobat themselves into something else.
And a lot of us can't acrobat. Like, I want to be able to like I was telling somebody the other day, I'm jealous of babies because they could put their feet and they hold fists in their mouth, and I'm like, I want to be able to do that, but I can't in my mid-40s. And so it's just like, how can I, how can I exist in the writing world without having to do all those acrobats that my brain and my body can't do anymore? And they don't want to do it.
That's right. That's right.
This is a two-part question, and for those who have like followed me, I get into these long, like very high philosophical questions. How do you feed your craft, and then how do you feed your soul? And I ask this particular set of questions right now, thinking about how you are so giving of your time, expertise, and resources to other creatives. Like even in all of your answers about like coming to your writing as your authentic self, I heard teacher Lisa. Like I'm hearing Professor Lisa and even all of your responses. So you're even giving of yourself like as you're talking about your own writing. So how do you feed your craft and how do you feed your soul?
I think it's funny because I met this brother not too long ago, and he kept calling me Dr. Pegram. And I said, brother, I don't have a PhD. He said, that's all right, honey. It's just you, Dr. Pegram. I don't know what to tell you. That's just who you are. I said, okay, I'll accept that. No problem. I'll save myself 5 years of school and just take your honorary Dr. Pegram. No problem.
Yeah.
I think that's probably just my lineage flowing through me. I think that's the other thing too, is that, a lot of people talk about, you were saying, you're this dynamic person, this big personality that does these things for all of these other people. This is what also the purpose of this book that I'm writing is that in all of that the world experiences of me, at the end of the day, I am the tip of the iceberg. I'm the tip of the iceberg of all of the people that I come from. Like if you could see the tree that I come from, you'd be like, oh, she ain't nothing but an apple.
Yes.
And so I come from people who are rooted in service, my great grandfather was a doctor, and he worked in the Black community in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. And he would accept, like chickens and homemade wine, for his doctor services. And he had his clients, he made a point to have his clients over for dinner once a month. Some family from the community would come to the house for dinner. So this is just a part of the makeup of who I am. This is the way I raised. So I feel like life is, you got the tortilla, right? So you got one side of the tortilla that's you as an individual and your work and your craft. And then the other side of it is the way that you show up in community. And life is about that balance for me, right? And so the way I feed my soul, I suppose, is to tend to my awareness of maintaining that balance. So in as much as I do all that I can to show up for other people, I'm very intentional about that. Also because being an artist is a solitary act, right?
Yes.
So this gives you an opportunity to then, be in community. Oh, another part of that too is the fact that I'm from DC, which has shout out to all of my beloved DC arts community. It's such a community-based place, between coming from a family that's so based in service, coming from an arts community that's so based in community. This is just the way I roll. And so I hold that side down, and then I balance that with some very intentional solitude. Right. So I have to build that in, because I have to say probably showing up for service is more intuitive for me even sometimes than showing up for myself. Right. I have to make more of an effort to show up for my own work. That really changed when I went to grad school, because I was, as you just finished your dissertation, right? So you're working on your dissertation. So it was so consuming. I had a full-time job. I was a high school English teacher at the time.
Wow.
Front woman of a band, and we were gigging. Like I was doing so much, and I was in a low-res MFA program, and I got it done. And it was because I set boundaries around my writing. And so even though I was doing all these other things, there was a time that was my writing time. And so I promised myself when I graduated that I was not going to just let life then seep in and take that away, because the service was always going to come. And so that practice, even more than getting that little receipt that could prove that I could finish a program.
The receipt.
That diploma is a receipt, baby. It's a discipline receipt. That's what I call it. It's a discipline receipt, right? But it also showed me that I could set aside. It was work to make that time to get that work done. And so I wanted to hold those same boundaries. And I really have done that. On Sundays, I write. On Saturdays until about 1 p.m., I was writing before I came in here. You know what I mean? That is my writing time, and it is not to be compromised. And that is a promise that I keep to myself. And everybody who's around me knows it. They're like, don't call Lisa on Sunday till after sundown because
Yes.
she's writing, you know. So, and you have to, and that is not a time I'm available, even though I'm a person who is part of community. Don't call me on no Sunday, and don't call me on Saturday morning either, you know. The other part of that I am very grateful for is that I have a very supportive partner. You know, my husband is like, go in that room and close the door and let me know what you want to eat. You know what I mean? Like, you know, that's super important too, particularly as a woman, right? Because I have certainly, you know, in my dating days had many situations where, you know, I dated folks that, you know, just want you to make, at some point, make yourself a little bit smaller. Can you just, you know, and you can't allow that, right? Because then it doesn't allow the space for you to fully show up for your work, which is your purpose in that thread of your life. So you can't allow somebody to compromise your purpose. So I'm real particular about tending to my solitude. And what that looks like is the time I set aside for my writing and the time I set aside for my self-care. I meditate daily. I do my yoga. I'm big about getting to the sea. That's why I live by the ocean, because I couldn't take it anymore. Like, oh, I'm gonna go on vacation for twice a year, and this is when I'm gonna get to sea. No, I need to be able to go out the door and get to the sea, because that's what
Wow.
feeds me and fills me. From my family traditions, food and music, those feed me, right? Those experiences of engaging in food and music, that fills me, that refills my well. So I curate my time with myself as much as I do with other people. I'm big on a solo date. I mean, I take myself on dates. Okay. Like, you always wonder, oh, this person took me on a date and it wasn't even what I wanted to be. I mean, who knows what you want better than yourself? I've done fabulous. And I remember one of my favorite dates I ever took myself on was when I was in DC. I went to the flamenco festival by myself. I mean, the whole festival, just, you know, I'm just going, right? And then I had a lovely dinner before. And what you find when you're by yourself is an experience of food when there's no one there to have conversation with is different, because you're really focused on the flavors. You're really focused on the textures. You're really focused on the experience you're having, because you're not bouncing off of somebody else. Same thing as the music festival. I was there just to listen. I wasn't turning to somebody else and saying, did you hear that? Right? So I really curate my solitude time as both just as a woman in terms of self-care and fun, and then as a writer, and then I balance that with then what I do for everybody else.
Nice. And I love that you gave a shout out to DC, which I call the Black Mecca of the US.
You tell me that about my hometown now.
Yes, because there's just so much like Black affirmation that happens there. And I'm from a you know, predominantly Black town.
You
Detroit.
also are. That's a very special experience.
It is. And it's just so like I was just thinking like yesterday I posed a picture because I got a new tattoo done of the landscape of downtown Detroit, and I was just
saw that.
Yeah.
And it looks like a heart monitor.
Yes, it is.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. And I was just thinking about, especially comparing my experience to many folks of color that are here in New England, where they grew up in predominantly white spaces, and it's like they got the complete opposite of affirmation. It's like they were invisible. And I'm like, you know, I'm proud to be someplace where, like, when the Malcolm X film came out, I think I was like in 6th or 7th grade, they took our entire school to go see it. And we talked about it. And then just to know about, like, I knew about Juneteenth since I was in grade school, and to have, you know, all of these very, like, it really not only feeds your soul and like pushes you, you know, throughout your life, but it also informs your creative practice. Because I noticed for myself, like, for example, like me, and this is why I always ask writers to question about the possibility and limitations of genre, because me, and especially since I'm coming to writing, you know, as not my first creative practice, as, you know, self-taught, I always think about the question of, you know, the boxes that genre can put you in. And when you're checking off the boxes of what to do for genre, you leave behind all of the things that are you and yourself. And so This next question, I feel like I feel like I'm projecting onto others, especially people who come from very Black centered spaces, but I'd love to hear about your own. So, you've had opportunities to live, work, play, collaborate, and exist in very African, diasporic, and Black centered
Mhm.
spaces, especially given that you grew up in Washington, D.C. I did not realize you had family members who were like senior level administrators at HBCUs. That shapes a very particular experience as well. So,
Mhm.
how, if you wanted to go more into this, because you started talking a little about it earlier, how do these places and experiences within these places inform your creative practice?
That's an interesting question. First, I want to tell you that when I was 6, I lived for a year in Detroit.
What?
Yes. I did first grade in Detroit because my mom got a job at Chrysler. We lived there for a year. She was like, "It's too cold. I can't take you." We
Yes.
DC, but I did live in DC in Detroit for a year. I went to Chrysler Elementary School.
Wow.
And my favorite memory from that is that speaking of growing up in a Black city, right? So predominantly Black city. So one of the four tops daughter was in my first grade class. And like I said, I grew up in a household where music played all the time, and I was an only child, so my musical taste was very mature. Okay, like I had a Fisher Price record player, and I started collecting records at about the age of 4 or 5. I was like, I need you to get me that Roberta Flack. I need the Wiz soundtrack. I was like, into it. So when I found out there was this girl whose dad was in the four tops of my class, I was like very excited. And she hated to see me coming because every time I would see her, I would start screaming Bernadette at her.
Yes.
Favorite quartet song. I'd be out there like on the playground like Levi screaming Bernadette.
Yes.
But I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but I really actually have had this privilege. So I lived 1 year in Detroit, but then we lived in DC, and then now I'm living in the Caribbean, which is also takes that experience to a whole other level, right? Um, I have talked to a lot of folks who are from this part of the world, folks who are from the continent, who are from Africa, who have said, "I didn't become Black until I moved to the States."
Wow.
Right. So now our experience growing up in predominantly Black cities in the States was a unique and special one because at least you were insulated in a way that you could experience Black culture as a dominant culture in your immediate environment in a way that people, like you said, that grew up like in a small town in New England or something like that didn't. Right. So I was able to go to African Liberation Day every summer and in Malcolm X Park, and I was able to attend African dance classes and do all these amazing things in my city because I lived in a city that was um, so circled around. At least my experience of the city was so Black, right? If you ran into a police officer, the police officer was likely Black. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? So your experiences of the city are a little bit different than in your place when you're more isolated, but still you're in that American context, right? So you are aware, right? And there are spaces that you move in where you are aware of your Blackness as an external phenomenon, like what other people perceive of you because you're Black. That's part of the American experience. We all have it. But when I moved to the Caribbean, it was like nobody's thinking about that. And that's not to say that there are not racial dynamics in any place that's been colonialized, because there
Right.
are. But it's a place that's predominantly Black. So it like takes my DC experience to a whole new level. I spent the first 2 years just shocked by the fact that I just saw Black and brown people on billboards everywhere all the time. Sometimes some of the same companies that I would see in the States, but because they know where they are, they know the demographic, right? Then they put Black people on the
Mhm.
billboards. You know what I mean? By the fact that there was no Black hair care aisle in the store because it was just hair care. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Um, and so not having to navigate, circumvent, work around, accommodate the white gaze in that oppressive kind of way frees up that energy for you to do something else with. Right? So it's like I'm that whole I noticed living here and I didn't leave. Like I wasn't, run with my pants up. Like I can't take it anymore. I don't want to be there around those people. Some people do leave for those reasons. I did not leave for that reason and I love my hometown. But a pleasant surprise was wow, like I'm just in a place where I'm surrounded by people who look like nobody is I live on an island. Nobody is tripping off of you because you're Black. Nobody looks at you funny because you walk in the door. You're Black. Like it doesn't happen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it just frees up that part of you. Now it's interesting because you touched on my family's experience on a HBCU, and I was just talking to my grandmother about this. And she was telling me about how they created this insular community on the campus. I was like, y'all were doing all this stuff like during Jim Crow. Were you not afraid? Were you not? You were in a small town in Virginia. And she said, yeah, but we created our own bubble on the campus. And like my mom grew up on that campus. They lived on the campus.
Wow.
So it wasn't just your job, they lived on the campus. And so on the campus, they had a hospital, they had a police force, they had an elementary school, the parents, all of our family friends are the other professors. It's like your auntie who was the French professor and your uncle who was the math professor and they did carpools so that they could take their kids places so they didn't have to ride the buses and sit in the back. They coordinated around, right? So they created this insular space so that they could be able to just live their lives as much as possible outside of accommodating whatever that climate was outside of it. And so the big part of it, I think, is for creatives is just when you don't have to do that, that goes back to what we said about the code switching too. When you don't have to do that, what do you do with that energy? That was energy that was being used for something else. What cool things can you do with that energy if you don't have to use it fighting the power all the time?
The power.
We gonna do it because we have to do it.
Right.
But can you imagine what Martin Luther King, I thought about this on Dr. King's birthday. What would that man have done with his life if he had not had to spend it the way he had to spend it, like on the battlefield? If he hadn't had to spend his whole life on the battlefield, that beautiful, charismatic man, what else we're grateful. I'm grateful for his legacy and his work, but what else might he and his beautiful wife have done with their lives and their children had they just been allowed to live free? Wow. Right? So then what I think being in predominantly Black spaces allows us to do, to whatever degree, is to free up that energy for something else.
Yeah, because I'll never forget when I learned that Coretta Scott King was a musician
That's
first.
right.
I was like,
that's right.
What? And so I can imagine her life if she didn't have to be the Black activist first. And like, I'm just, I'm like, we could have gotten albums from her. We could have gotten operas from her. We could have gotten so much from her if she did not have to be the Black activist. And it's like, yes, I really appreciated growing up in Detroit because it prepared me for this part of my life where I have to keep, reminding myself and looking in the mirror, I'm Black first, and this is how I lead, and being Black is beautiful. But at the same time, it's just like, and this goes back to like why it's been so hard to like dream and set goals, because I'm tired of every single day I have to be like, let me put my dashiki armor on, let me, puff up my furrows so I can go out here and fight the fight all the time. So it's just now you got, see, again, this is why I like these conversations. I'm so selfish in them because they become my personal master classes, but it's just like, you just gave me a lot to think about in terms of my own work. It's like, what would it be like to be, what would it be like to write free? Like,
there's a beautiful dance artist, choreographer, Giselle Mason. She has this project. I was introduced to her by Tony Lightfoot. There's my DC poetry community again.
oh wow.
Giselle has this beautiful ongoing project called Yes and it's an improvisational project that basically asks like women of color and Black women in particular, if you didn't have to do that thing, if you didn't have to do that, if you had the resources that you needed, if people would just let you be, what would you do?
Wow.
What would you do? I mean, and that's a question that we often don't ask each other or ourselves, because we got to do what we got to do. My grandmother just told me yesterday, she said, you have to understand that as a Black woman in the world, but certainly in the United States, you have to learn how to navigate that battlefield in order to exercise your talents.
Ooh.
It's an integral part of you have to, if you want to do your work, you have to learn how to navigate that battlefield in a way that a person who is not a person of color, that is not, we all have obstacles to getting our work done. You know, the road is not just smooth for everyone. We all have obstacles, but do you have that extra weight of having to like run that gauntlet in addition to, right? So, and that's the reality of it, right? So then how can we seek out as many opportunities as possible just to be able to take a breather so we could just do our work? Just want to do your work.
I need to sit on that for a minute. Because it's like I've always just been, like I've always just led Black woman first. And it's like, oh, what if I didn't have to do that?
And then so then you use your creative power as a creative person to ask, well, what can I do to create, even if it's just little spurts of it? And maybe it is leaning into this community that you have. Maybe it is filling yourself as much as you possibly can in environments. And that's why it's so important for us to function in community. I mean, I look at what they did on that HBCU campus. They wouldn't have been able to do that if they were all functioning individuals. They all got together and they said, this is the quality of life we want to live. We want to be able to do our work. This is what we want for our kids. And so how can we work together to be able to create a space? They did have to leave the campus. They did, but not for much. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? So it's how do you eke out little spaces at least for you to be able to like come up for air? If you imagine that you're submerged the whole time, how do you come up for air and fill your lungs so that you can then go back to doing that versus just doing your work?
Wow. So I want to pose a question that came in from our viewers earlier that then segues into my next question. And I know a little bit about this because we've worked together for a little bit now, but I'm curious, and also for you to share publicly, like, what does your writing community look like? Because you mentioned like writing in solitude a lot, but do you have like people who you go to for ideas or to review things or even to workshop things?
Absolutely. I mean, there is the part where, you know, you got to sit alone with the page and your feelings. Like there's a time, there's that time, because you need to have something to bring to the table. I mean, that's, here I go, you know, I'm always going to bring us back to the table, right?
Yes.
Put on the table to ask somebody how it tastes. And they'd be like, I need salt. You know, you have to have something to bring to the table. But often even some of those practices for myself are not completely by myself. I mean, on Sundays, and on both Saturdays and Sundays, I am a part of two different Zoom writing groups where we literally just get on Zoom, and you can have your camera on or not, but nobody's mic is on, and we just all show up and we write. Actually, no, I'm a part of three now that I say it, because I just started this third one on Sundays.
Oh, wow.
I started a third one on Sundays for Asian American writers, actually. So there was a group of Asian American writers who kind of all had individually approached me about helping them with projects. And I was like, you know what, but I think you all need to be in conversation with each other. And you all are also trying to show up to the page. So how about we create a little studio on Sundays, which is great for me, because then it's an excuse for me to have, two places to show up to do my writing. But those are places where you just show up and you write. Like, it's not a workshop. You're not having conversation. You're just showing up and you're writing. And then one of those groups is my workshop group, where, periodically or at the end of the session, everybody will talk about, kind of what they shared. So there are countless people. I'm inspired by so many people that I definitely share my work with, that send me their work to read. And so we definitely have that ongoing exchange. Some of those people are people from my DC writing community. Some of them are people from grad school. Some of them are everywhere I go. I seem to connect with, I'm a people person, so I connect with people, and I do my best to maintain those relationships, like you, right? We met at an Emily Dickinson reading, right?
Right.
And I was like, she's dope. like,
Aww.
let me reach out to her. That's the other thing. You have to be intentional about building community and show up for people, the way they show up for you as well. But you also have to respect them enough to take the time with your work to get it ready for them to read, and then bring that to the table.
Yeah. And then thinking about writing as a profession.
Mm-hmm.
How you've curated teams for other authors, because we've had authors, on past episodes of Black Writers Read. Like, we have one in particular who is joining us this afternoon, who has shouted out the team of people, from like editors to like cover illustrators to publicists, that you've curated for them. And even I remember on one, you even was like, you were in the chat and you were like, I'm gonna find you a new publisher. So who is on your team, and why do you think these teams or communities are important for writers of color?
Well, I mean, for the same reasons that I said before. I mean, I think teams are important for writers of color because you have to have people who see you and are willing to show up for you as your authentic self, not say, first, I need you to make yourself palatable for me, right? Like, people who don't ask you to do that part. You have to identify those people. And that's also not limited to, there are a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds who are capable of doing that. But you have to know who they are and have those people in your life, right? So they don't have to just be Black writers. I mean, I'm a pretty, my network is far reaching. I got Black folks, white folks, Asian folks of all kind, Latino folks of all kind. That's important too, right? So that you can have some level of complexity to your own personal experience. So you have to be able to develop your filter and know where your safe spaces are. But I think as writers of color in an industry, in the creative industries, no matter what you're talking about, if you're talking about publishing, if you're talking about films, these industries are not set up to cater to us, no matter what demographic role we play as consumers. They are not set up to cater to us. And so you could have an editor that says, I want to sign you and I want to acquire your book, but are they going to do right by your book? Right? Are they going to ask you to make your book something it's not? So I think the most important thing is that we have to have people of color in these positions in the industry. We need to have publicists and publishers and editors of color so that they can be that voice at the table. You got to have, you know, directors of color and filmmakers and screenwriters of color so that they can be at the table. They don't have to be the only people at the table, but they have to be at the table so that their voice and their perspective can be heard. And so it behooves us to develop that community for ourselves, not to walk in and say, oh, it's not here. Oh, well, no, then you have to create that for yourself. And if you create that for yourself and you've got dynamic, talented, interesting people, things like this happen, right? I could say, oh, it's hard for me to get on a podcast because nobody's interested in what I'm talking about. But I'm sitting up here talking to you. Why should I be banging on somebody's locked door instead of going and talking to you and figuring out how we can work together and how we can amplify what each other's doing? Why should I not take a leap of faith? Why should I not bank on us when I'm already taking a risk or a leap of faith banging on a knocked door? It's a risk either way. So knowing how I believe in how brilliant and talented and expansive and how much we bring to the table as people of color, why would I not take a leap of faith on us too?
I have two more questions. Like I could continue this conversation like for an eternity. I so can, but I'm like,
thank you for having me. I
yeah,
really appreciate it. I'm usually the one asking the questions. I'm like,
right. I have been looking forward to this for so long. So actually I'm going to do three more questions. So as like I, meet the people of your community, the community that you built for yourself, I learned that, you're an educator. I'll never forget when I first heard that you were an educator. And I was like, yep, I see it. I so see it. So given that you that educating others has been a important way that you serve, what would you tell the younger Lisa about how to prepare for the career and the life that you carved out for yourself?
I'd say stay organized, ease on down the road.
Yes.
Those yellow bricks come one by one. It doesn't start out necessarily as a whole path laid out in front of you. And let it reveal itself. Because of all the things we talked about earlier about how these unexpected tangents may come up that you think are taking you off your path, but actually sometimes they're taking you another route that's going to get you closer to what you're doing. So if you can plan, right? But don't be rigid. Don't be rigid because your greatest blessings could pass you by because you were holding on. There's this, I read it years ago. You remember that book, The Celestine Prophecy?
It sounds familiar.
Gosh, this was years ago. And I don't remember the whole book, but I do remember this one scene. And this is what I would tell myself, my younger self. So there's a scene and a guy, I believe, is fallen into like a river, like a rushing river. And he's like, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm just not going to make it. And so he's holding on to this branch, like on the bank for dear life. So the river doesn't carry him away. Right. He's like, and there's no way you're going to fight that current. You're just not, And so he's holding on till he can't hold any, I believe, yes, he can't hold on anymore. And then he has to let go and he lets go. And then it turns out that the river was the quick way for him to get to where he was supposed to be.
Oh, wow.
So he had been fighting, trying to hold on the whole time when really that river was the vehicle that was going to get him to where he was supposed to go next. So don't hold so tight, I would tell myself, right? Don't hold so tight, because you never know what unexpected blessing is going to help get you closer to where you're supposed to be.
Nice. And then since you mentioned that you're always interviewing other people, um, what is a vital question that you like to pose to yourself in the current breadth of your work?
Hmm. Oh, one thing I want to add to that, what you said about the younger self, I'm thinking about this now, because I've had all these different experiences that I've had all these different experiences that I take this little piece from here and this little piece from there, and they've all contributed to who I am now. And so I say that my career is like a good mole sauce or a good curry. Like,
Ooh.
it takes a lot of different seasonings to make that happen, you know? It's layered. It's layered. And so it's not just a salt and pepper situation. So you gotta let
Yeah.
all of these different things come together to create that full flavor that you want, right? And it tastes even better, the next day, right? So that would be what I would tell my younger self too. Your question was,
What question, since you've interviewed others, and this
oh,
may take you some time, like what vital question would you ask of yourself and of your work now?
um, the set the table. What does that mean? I guess would
Mm.
be the question, because people, I have this thing that I do on social media where I post, where I say set the table, and it's a literal thing where I may be setting a table with some food on it. It's also an abstraction. It might be, I might say set the table and be talking about what my yoga practice was for that day, right? So, because that's the way I'm setting the table for the day or the week. So, um, yeah, so I would say, and because I've been doing that, I've noticed that people will come up to me now and they'll say, "Oh, set the table," and I'll be like, "Oh, wow!" Like, people actually,
Yes.
I'll be like, "Oh, set the table." Um, so what does it mean? It is that, it is the concrete. It is set the table. Like, bring people around the table, share a meal together, have those conversations. But also, how can you be intentional about how you start your day, how you start your week,
Mm.
how you start your year? How is it that you are setting the table? Because that's what you need to do. You need to have lay things in place. I say that setting a table is about a balance between beauty and utility, right? So if you're serving soup, you need bowls. You don't put a plate on the table. You need spoons. You don't put a fork on the table, right? So you're going to pick the vessels that best suit the meal that you're trying to serve, and you're going to have that utility on the table, and then you're going to make it beautiful. And you could twist that into an abstraction that also deals with, like, how you approach the things that you're trying to accomplish in your life. Yeah.
Nice. And then the last question. Besides your memoir, what is next for you and how can the Black Writers Read? Which, oh, I'm getting chills just thinking about this. I can now officially add you to the Black Writers Read
I
roster.
know, right? I'm so excited.
Oh, how can the Black Writers Read community support you on your journey?
Um, well, you can have me back when the
Yep.
book is out and I can read. That's what I can do. Yeah, so you can have me back, and let's keep collaborating. So that's me. That's my writing. That's what I would love to do, is come back and share what that experience is when I'm on the other side of it. And then also, let's just keep collaborating to celebrate many, many more authors and their work in the world, and support them and support each other. Let's continue to work in community with each other. That's what Black Writers Read can do for me, is what you've already, just more of what we've already been doing, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And speaking of, I was like trying to find the right opportunity to mention this. I'm going to continue mentioning it until we get there. So, one of the things so Black Writers Read, we're not just, a live stream series, we're not just a podcast, we are a community. And one of the things that I am launching this summer, as the podcast goes on hiatus, I'm doing virtual book clubs. And it will be,
Oh,
yes, featuring two authors that Lisa introduced me to. We're going to be reading their books over the summer.
oh,
Yes.
Who's what? Oh, are you not announcing who the books are yet?
Actually, I'll do it because I've already confirmed with them. So we will be reading Natasha Gordon Chippenberry's book and
Gorgeous
Tracy
book.
Cross.
Oh, excellent. That's an
Yeah.
excellent pairing. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited about that. And I love a good book club. So yes,
Mhm.
indeed. I will be staying tuned for that.
Yeah, and what will be so cool about that book club, the authors will be joining us. So you will have an opportunity to interact directly with the author about their work. Like that's the part about the book club that I'm even most excited about is that the authors will be there, bring tons of flowers to throw and rose petals to throw at them because these have been also too like some really as I'm like, continuing the podcast and the live stream and going back and like seeing, the traction, these have been some of the episodes and interviews that have gotten a ton of traction. And so I was just like, people are going to want to engage with this book more, but also too, this is going to be something that I'm going to do because my whole mission is to really get us reading and to start this reading community. And I was like, Black Writers Read can't just exist as like, a podcast or a live stream series. It's like, what's going to be the next thing? And the next thing is going to be the virtual book club over the summer, which I'm really
Oh,
excited
excellent.
about.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
I highly recommend both of those books. Those are
Yes.
those are page turners indeed.
And then when your book comes out, be like, hmm.
We'll have some fun. Maybe you could do a book clubbing and it's a dinner club or something. We get some food pop,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Let's do that. Yeah, we gonna put that on simmer.
Yes. Oh my gosh. See, so great. So great to collaborate with you.
Like,
So yes. So Lisa, thank you so. Oh my gosh. Oh my god, it's about. I'm not gonna say it's over, but it's like opening the door to a new beginning.
yes, it's not the what do they say? It's not the end. It's not the beginning of the end. It's the end of the beginning,
Yes.
or something like that, right?
Yeah.
We
Yes.
just
And
got one course. We on to the next course of the feast.
yes, this was like a really nice appetizer with a couple of like, pairing drinks, and we're going to the salad course next.
There we go.
Yes. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And I want to give another shout out to Michael Mercurio, the Emily Dickinson Museum, for introducing us and bringing us together. Because I am just
Hey,
so yes, I am beyond grateful and thankful to be a part of this community, Lisa.
likewise. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who chose to spend a little bit of your Saturday with us.
Yay! So I'm going to do a couple more wrap up things for this episode. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
So I'll be back next Sunday, January 29th. Yes, we're just going. And I'm so excited for this one. I am bringing Shanita Hubbard to talk about her book, Ride or Die, A Feminist Manifesto for the Well-Being of Black Women. She has been on tour with this book for some time, and I am extremely grateful and very excited to add her to the Black Writers Read roster next week. So find me and more about Black Writers Read online on my website at NicoleMYoung.com. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Thanks to all of our viewers for spending this afternoon with us, and for more importantly, ensuring that Black writers continue to matter. See you next Sunday.